Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Earlier today, thousands rallied in Brooklyn's Prospect Park in favor of expanding charter schools around New York. My next guest was the keynote speaker, and he delivered a passionate address calling for more attention and more resources for charter schools. After this morning's rally, he returned to Washington, D.C., where he joins us now from our bureau near the Capitol, where earlier today Congress overrode a veto by President Obama for the first time since he became president. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Errol.
Let's talk about the charter stuff first. Why did you choose to headline that rally, and what was the gist of your speech?
Well, I've been a supporter of education reform since my days in the New York State Legislature, where I concluded that there's no more solemn obligation that we as public policymakers than to ensure that all of our children have an opportunity for an education that strongly prepares them for the challenges of the 21st century economy. And if we're honest about the system, we know that for decades in many neighborhoods like Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, Brownsville, Coney Island, Harlem, the South Bronx, Southeast Queens, that the public school system has unfortunately failed generation after generation of young people, in many cases dooming them to life sentences of disadvantage and despair. And we can't continue to do the same exact thing year after year and expect that we're going to get different results. And so I think that the charter school movement has been an important part of the effort to improve the quality of public school education in New York City. We've got a track record of demonstrated success in increasing proficiency amongst Black and Latino students in terms of math and reading, and in turning the situation around in many neighborhoods. And that's why I thought it was important to join the call to double down on the effort with respect to charter schools in New York City.
Do you think in the long run that charters can be the standard for the system as a whole, or can become a place where most New York City students attend school?
No, I don't think that's going to be possible. At the end of the day, we're still going to see a situation where 80 to 85% of New York City public school students are educated in a traditional public school context. But I do think charter schools can be a beacon in some ways because they have the opportunity to try out different educational approaches and can demonstrate areas where things have worked successfully, and that hopefully that can then be exported to the traditional public school system.
You've heard the critiques, I'm sure, as I have over the years, that the charters aren't playing fairly, that they are counseling out students so that they can improve their scores, that they are not taking their share of English language learners or taking their share of special ed students. Is that a concern for you?
Well, charters should be elevated, and bad charter schools, and there always will be a few bad apples who are not doing the right thing, should be discarded. But I think on balance, what we've seen, if there is an objective review of the record, is that the overwhelming majority of charter schools are adding value to the education of students in traditionally underserved communities. Now, we've got to make sure, and I will consistently maintain, that charter schools are educating the same group of young people as found in a traditional public school context in a neighborhood like Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brownsville, East New York, Coney Island, or many of the other traditionally underserved communities in New York City. Because if part of the premise of the value added by charter schools is that you can export some of the methodologies that are used to improve the greater public school system, then of course, Errol, you got to make sure that you are educating the same exact student, which you can measure based on ELL, measure based on eligibility for free and reduced price lunch, measure it based on special needs population. These are things that were initially put into place by the legislature when I was there in 2008 around the Race to the Top legislation, and we have to continue to make sure that charter schools are educating the same types of students.
Okay, let me switch to the other business at hand. You voted and helped sustain an override of a veto of the President of the United States for the first time. Getting into the substance of the issue, the point here was to allow individuals to sue governments, in particular in connection with the events of 9/11. The White House says that this opens up a Pandora's box of potential liability for the United States. As an attorney, are you concerned about that?
I understand the White House's position and the president's responsibility as the leader of the free world, in part, take into consideration the geopolitical dynamics involved in allowing United States citizens to sue a foreign sovereign. But the 9/11 attacks were a unique and tragic event in our nation's history. And so unique circumstances require for unique action. And in this particular case, giving the families of September 11th victims the opportunity to sue the Saudi Arabian government is called for, given the dramatic nature of the events around 9/11. I don't think it will open up Pandora's box, because there's no other example in our nation's history that you can compare the events of September 11th to.
Well, what about the chain of liability? If the idea here is that the Saudi government was directly or indirectly subsidizing the attackers, well, the United States subsidizes the Saudi government. I mean, where does the chain of liability end?
Well, listen, at the end of the day, the families of the 9/11 victims are going to have to go into court with a high burden of proof and demonstrate that there is some culpability and legal responsibility amongst the Saudi government. I don't think that the chain of events will ultimately lead us to the United States of America. And at the end of the day, we didn't get rid of sovereign immunity as it relates to the federal government. And so I don't think the Pandora's box is necessarily open, though I understand that these are reasonable and technical concerns that have been articulated that we've got to weigh whenever we have an important legislative issue like this in front of us. But the nature of the events surrounding September 11th call for dramatic action.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for now. I know you've got some more voting to get to tonight. Thank you for running out of the Capitol to join us for just a few minutes. Thanks a whole lot.
Always a pleasure, Errol.